Tamam.
Ve çünkü ben de zor girdim, mail unutmuşuz şeyleri. Direkt takdim et. We can start with your Esra.
Okay. Distinguished guests, dear colleagues and students, I'm pleased to welcome you to Üsküdar University International Communication Day, second day keynote session. I'm honored one more time to present Dr. Maureen Ellis, who is a senior research associate at University College London. And some of you might remember, she was the keynote speaker at the 7th International Communication Days as well. Before we start, I should note that Maureen has shared her presentation and some additional links with us. You may find them on our website. You may also find an interview with Maureen in the 8th issue of our faculty's academic journal, Interaction, Etkileşim Dergisi. We will take questions from the chat screen and I'll read them for Maureen later at the end of her speech. I think that works better that way. As Maureen advised me, I'm not reading a biography so that we save some time. Title of our keynote speaker today is Metaphor, Mystic Myth, Spirituality, Science. Maureen, hello again. It's so good to have you here again. The floor is yours. Let's begin.
Thank you, Ezra. Thank you, Dean Nazifa, for this opportunity.
You're welcome.
And to Suleiman, our interpreter, Yuksal, our technician, and to you, the audience. I planned this as a 1-hour talk, so it may be a bit of a race, but as Ezra says, feel free to send in questions, and whether we deal with them immediately or we follow them up, we're happy to keep this as a conversation that we can develop together. This opening slide shows you symbols, which to some of you may just be signs. They are signs all saying energy, this concept of energy, and denotation of energy, maybe Ohm or the International Energy Agency, the International Renewable Energy Agency, Einstein's E equals mc squared, that equation, or energy in the form of the dome on the rock, in the form of the spire, the lightning rod, which the metaxy between man and God, trying to catch enlightenment. How you interpret this, the denotation will become connotation for you, and the color, the shape, the location, the original name and the meaning of the name will all become recognizable, not just cognitive, but recognition, comforting. Knowledge, experience, familiarity will feed the imagination. It will influence our empathy, our emotions, memories, perceptions, how we perceive and receive images. And this is what my books study, the semiotics, the science of signs, how signs grow into symbols, powerfully importing and exporting deep values. This sign, for example, H3N8, may just mean nothing, but for people within the field, for people who want to look it up, it will convey a new form of energy. Unfortunately, it's bird flu. A shift from denotation to connotation and how it influences consciousness and human health. Psychotherapist Carl Gustav Jung, whose mandala I've built my research on, visited India, Africa, corresponded with Chinese anthropologists, and he created his own Unus Mundus, one world mandala, with Eastern philosophy as the foundation of Western myth and civilization and technology. In mine, I use Eastern critical realist philosophy and Western chat, cultural historical activity theory, so that the philosophy and the methodology helped me work with over 500 teachers, teacher educators, NGO administrators, and academics. And it's worth noting at this point that the yin-yang is black in white, white in black. It's avoiding extremes. It's looking always for the many alternatives, for the options, for the not just A convincing B or B obstructing A, but together A and B, not just through dialogue, but through dialectics, both searching for the third way forward and using all the various possibilities of this shifting middle line to find future fit solutions. Now, Jung put at the heart of his mandala all the myths that we share, that the beliefs that lead to our behavior. Some of them based on fact and truth and science, and we've actually researched them. Others that we've just adopted and accepted and need now to think more clearly about, because they make such a difference to our health and to the community health. So, for example, myths like, oh, we mustn't tax the rich because otherwise they leave Britain. Well, that's worth exploring. Other myths like, this is the best food. If you want to be beautiful, if you want to be successful, this is the best way to live. Myths of health and success require probing and research and scientific justification. Today, neuroscientists, ethical neuroscientists, use insects, microbes, sponges, octopus, even tardigrades, microbial dust. Now, tardigrades really bring to life some of our myths about us, man coming out of a handful of dust. And so our myths are coming true, and science and life. And when I say science, you'll see, I don't just mean physics and chemistry, but all the sciences, social sciences as well, are beginning to realize the strength, the value, the eternal truths in our most spiritual and sustaining myths. And this search for what does it mean? What does consciousness mean? Some people will say, oh, it's a very hard question. Some people, like Jungians, might say, well, that's what we call God, collective consciousness, collective unconscious. So it depends on what you see as hard and real in life. Here are some of the neuroscientists who are fortunately beginning with our commonwealth, the goodness of life, the godness of life that we all share. Jung, a great saintly hero for our world, researching not just with Freud, psychoanalysis, but psychotherapy, health. And he wrote about modern man in search of a soul. Now, Brenkio and Bauer think a lot of our troubles today are because physicians, not just the medical world, the pharmaceutical world also, are in a great hurry to prescribe. They're in a great hurry to name and to make great big directories of all the problems. But they don't spend enough time listening to people, working with the family, looking at the context in which this person's troubles, looking over time. Time is a great factor, timing. And what we give our time to, our priorities, our prayers, our values, this is what we need to start thinking about. And these neuroscientists, you will see that they begin with memory and empathy and breath and dreaming and pleasure and what's happening with the heart. And so we have very good leadership in this field, looking at how we've evolved, not just what's happening on the surface today, but what has mattered in human development. And so, for example, Damasio, he separates homeostasis, the physical, inner, enteroception, as against emotion, the psycho and socio-expression of well-being. So that's bringing biology and psychology and phenomenology together in a very helpful, meaningful way. So we understand why people are behaving as they do. We relate it to variables of pain, compassion, memory. We see drugs differently, and we see how these can work together in a transdisciplinary move towards neuroscience, brain science, and not just brain up here, like an egg on two sticks, but brain, what's called the gut-brain axis, starting with the gut brain, with the central nervous system, with the peripheral nervous system, seeing that although we started with just 5 senses, today we're aware of many more ceptors or receptors taking in our relationship with the environment. This understanding of the myths that we all share, Jung, of course, used a mandala, the sort of circles within circles nesting I showed you earlier. And he saw that as much as we have come out of the earth, that as much as we are part of creation and Mother Earth, so also our myths, our symbols are all shared. And what we rely on is neuroplasticity. As he says, there's less variation in our races and individuals when you come to the myths. He works on a concept called archetypes. These are the shared ways of thinking and relating to the environment. Now, today, how do we relate to our environment? We're also sick with this, the succession, not just this most recent war, but the many conflicts and wars, the jihad of our lives, the struggle. And of course, when myths are being shared, when stories are being passed around the world, the mechanics, the maths, the symbols for money, they move, and music as well, thank God. Those move across much faster than language. But when it comes to language, it's slower getting coherence and collaboration. So, for instance, how do we read the current major crisis? Do we say it's Putin versus Biden versus using Zelensky? Do we say it's Russia and America happily fighting it out on poor Ukrainian soil? Do we say it's Orthodox Church versus Russian Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox versus Russian Orthodox, and then Western, some might say American, Christian, Democratic, whatever your metaphor? How do we read the world today? However we phrase it or frame it, youth and age are being slaughtered. Innocent and ignorant are dying together. Each side is claiming it's a holy war, it's their duty, it's their commitment. So somehow this religion comes from the word ligare, the Latin meaning the ligaments, that which binds the body together, holds it together, that which connects our limbs, our muscles. And yet religion, reconnect, isn't working. Now, the Pew Research reports that 84%, more than 84% of the global population affiliates to a religion. So why isn't it working? There's climate change, there's pandemic, Alzheimer's, autism, poor media literacy. We really need to look more closely at the myths and the metaphors we live with, we're using. Jung discovered these archetypes, and he found, like I say, he worked with India, Africa, China. He visited these places, he wrote, and he spent his whole life. He was very taken with the Vedic and Sanskrit myths. For instance, Purusha and Vitruvian Man. And here you see also the many-headed white elephant, Ganesh. And These ancient myths, for instance, Purusha and Vedic understanding of creation, say that the elements, earth, air, fire, water, and ether, came together to give man our five senses. Of course, today we talk about many more senses: proprio, chemo, thermo, entero, nociceptors. But essentially, the metaphors and the myths that have developed from our basic five spiritual senses. And even our myths have just been adapted to different cultures. These are what Joseph Campbell and Heinrich Zimmer, call the masks. But these are not the reality, which is much deeper. And so, for instance, the story of little Ganesh trying to protect his mother Parvati, not recognizing his father Shiva, who chops off his head, and then Ganesh picks up the elephant head. That means he uses memory and this mammoth, outdated mammoth. And basically we have a story that is the Oedipus myth, or in Sigmund Freud's psychology, the Oedipus complex. So these truths have traveled, have sustained mankind over time and place and sensory change and symbolic change. Proto-Indo-European, Proto-Indo-Aryan, this perennial wisdom says that the names have changed, but the charisma, the bread and wine, or the bread, food and drink that we all share. The names might go from Judaic Elo, Islamic Allah. In Christianity, we're told not to use the name of God, but people do, and you've got to really investigate what they mean. If they go on Jesus, 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 that isn't a healthy sign, because it isn't necessarily engaging the widest audience. Today, science is still trying to understand these mysteries, these myths. And today, attraction, love, desire, maybe, this word electromagnetism is the science name for the same magic or wisdom. Some of you may be familiar with T.S. Eliot's poem, The Journey of the Magi. That's worth looking up. It will explain how I use the word magi, wisdom, magic. But today we're still dealing with mystery, understanding continuity. We talk about the gluon cells, gravity. These are still part of the mystery we're exploring. So coming to the evolving nous, common sense, understanding. In the old days, Arthashastra, the Vedic Sanskrit text, said earth science. But of course, science then meant all the sciences. Life, it was treating life as a work of art. Not just birth and death, but life. Not just the extreme ends, but all of life, excellence, applying universal truths and values to contexts. And this common sense evolving out of Africa to Asia Minor, the geopolitics that came via Anatolia, branched to India, then to the West, restructuring, transforming humanity's understanding of its role, its power, its responsibilities, its responsibility as well. This branching, we've got to be careful that we retain the rainbow, the many and diverse interpretations that are available to us. This neuroplasticity, which allows us to see symbolic value rather than to switch off and say, oh, that's a Christian cross. No, it could be a plus sign. It could be an eye that is denied, sacrificed. It could turn slightly and become a multiplication sign. You know, the multiplicity of goodness in our lives. These ancient symbols, why 3 arrows? What trinity, what semantic, semiotic trinity is being expressed there? Greg Bateson, a wonderful anthropologist and sociologist, and his wife, Margaret Mead, they did a lot of work with many tribal communities, and they saw how the individual, the phenotype, emerges from the genotype. And today we use their work to understand schizophrenia, suicide, post-traumatic stress disorder, how people who think black and white, who think extremely, and cannot see the variety of life, the diversity, great danger. We use their work, in fact, to also understand alcoholism, gambling, and medical and mental complaints, which are not necessarily so obvious. Fractured lives. In the Middle Ages, Hermes Trismegistus, meaning 3 times great. That was a figure that showed man as in between. Metaxy, it's called, metaxy. You will see the word again later in the PowerPoint. It's like me as a taxi, you know, moving swiftly through my consciousness, through my life, being a messenger of good, able to raise our imperfect natures. Notice above Hermes' head is the infinity symbol. In front of him is a table, an even playing field, an equivalent, food and drink, a level table, bread and wine, transforming base metal into authentic gold. And today we have all these mystics, Buddhist, Islamic, Christian, able to see Emmanuel, God with us, El Manu, able to see past, present, future, progressive revelation, how human matter will work with the spirit of the earth, and not necessarily being negative in their interpretation. In fact, this Buddhist scholar, Thich Nhat Hanh, who has recently died, such a beautiful character, rejected in Vietnam, went to France, and showed through all the YouTube clips, which you can access easily, that it is possible to live happily within the present. We don't have to look for other planets and other worlds before we improve the messages, the messiahship of this world. Critical hermeneutics interprets text, hermeneutics from Hermes. If you're a messenger for good, you interpret texts so that you manage cause and effect. You manage this generation's greed as against the future generation's needs. You use caritas, care, in this management. Even Abu Ram, Atma is Brahma. Yes, the soul, Atma, individual and collective, is Brahma, is God, is goodness, creativity, inspiration. Even Abu Ram, Brahma comes from the Sanskrit term related to sound. These wonderful, wonderful terms are worth looking up. Anybody who loves language, this should really spur you on and enjoy the rest of your life is changed by a search for meaning. And as we say, we can't look into people's minds, but we can use language as a tool towards a greater communication. And even Abraham got it wrong in a sense, because he, for a start, he had to change his name from Abu Ram to Abraham. And he thought at one point that God wanted him to sacrifice his own son. But that was not true. If you read Genesis 17:5, God found another way out. Or God, I say God, meaning goodness. Goodness, man understanding that God is not a cruel, punishing God. No power needs us to kill our next generation. And yet today, that's what we're doing. We're sacrificing future generations for old men's dreams, for the military-industrial complex, for failed politicians, for inadequate diplomats or diplomacy. Diplomacy is double. Ploma is flying, and diploma, just seeing black and white and not able to fly at any other speed or at any other altitude. Just two extremes. Here is some of the extremes that we want to avoid, that we want to balance. Hegel talked about absolute spirit, the way humanity must move from thesis to antithesis to synthesis, how this constant trinity, this movement, requires exploring between these extremes. For instance, we always talk about mother tongue, and some people are willing to die for their mother tongue. But during your life, you develop many father tongues. You become a scientist or an artist or a musician. And so you develop language, discourse, communication in other fields. Life is far more complex than black and white. And thank God we don't have to choose between euphoria and dysphoria. We have metaphors which can explore all the in-between, what you're allowed to say, what you can say aloud, what you must choose with care, your metaphors for your particular audience. So this dialogic imagination, Bakhtin writes beautifully about it. The heteroglossia of life, the many voices that we have to work through and with. And not just A and B, but A and B leading to C, D, E, X, Y, Z, generation after generation. And it's a complex acoustic process from feeling and emotion and inattention to the good intentions that we need today. It's not just dialogue, it's dialectics. This slide shows immanent within us, within our power, but also transcending where we're at the moment. This spirit, this soul of S-O-U-L, the spirit of unconditional loving, provided we are not fixated, on personification, provided our God is not limited by our imagination, provided we don't just see him the way it suits us, but we are able to see that this is a great power that has been developing over the years, the different names. And today you might talk about development, but that involves evolution. Lope, like leaping, metaphor. We'll come to more on metalepsis. There is movement, there is meaning, it's happening. We've got to be able to see this move as Peirce, a great hero, the father of semiotics, saw the movement from chaos to order, from unpersonalized feeling, creation, to a better world. Mystics like Peirce, they reject negativity. sin and guilt and shame and punishment and cruelty. No, they see us interacting with the environment, with energy, with the resilience of the earth. Mother Earth, so powerful. I know a lot of us say, Our Father who art in heaven, but like we said before, it's an interaction. Thank God for the grace of the earth, the revival power, how it sustains us even after our mismanagement of the environment. And whether you see life and development as a 5-star, 6-star, concentric circles, nested, whatever, this development is what we should be focusing on, the spirit that is working through our metaphors, through our lives. Now, today, the stress is very accentuated by refugee migrations, asylum seekers, so many memes coming to us through the media. And it takes a lot of neuroplasticity. You can't afford to be rigid or fundamentalist because fixations cause mental distress, distortion, autism, dementia, Alzheimer. Semiotics allows you to read the signs and there were, 3 worlds working together. There's the world of our minds. The Sanskrit called it ki. The internet connection is unstable, it says. I hope not. The Sanskrit ki, the Chinese tai chi, the Greek tai chi. Today you might say the key to my life. What's going on in the human mind, the icons we use. Maybe some of you use icons on WhatsApp or wherever. These work together with, so they start with our psychology, our phenomenology, and then they work together with the synechy of life, the science of life, the hard realities of life, the objects and the environment around us. And they're also then influencing the way we talk, the way we use what's in us, what's around us. How do we name these realities? How do we argue about them, discuss them, share them? How do they become part of the law? Not just LORE, the myths, but the LAW of our lives. So this constant 3-way trinity, semiotics, is very popular across all the disciplines, particularly, of course, in commerce and marketing, because they'd love to use our imagination to their purposes. Now, I say there, of course, it can be used well for good purposes, to persuade people to live better lives, to eat healthier, to live more systematically, methodically, to be more observant. But it can also be used for commercial purposes. And that's where critical discourse analysis, critical semiotics is essential. Media literacy. Here we have Lakoff and Johnson, cognitive metaphor theory, showing us how important it is how we see things, the conceptual grounds, and how we talk about them, but how they're related. If you, as we all do, but we don't necessarily realize that this is the ground when we say, oh, I did it, somebody made me do it, I had to do it. Well, then we're working on this concept that causation is making. But of course, we don't necessarily name it karma, but karma is causality, seeing how cause and effect work together in the world. Seeing your body as a container means you may use some of these expressions. So on the left are the concepts that we work with in our cultures, and on the right are the ways we talk about them. But once we write them, if we write them, and that's how linguistics works, all these is words are written as equal signs. And that helps us to treat values like equations, you might say. So once you put an equal sign here, it's like you're saying to whoever you're communicating with, this is the value system I'm starting with. And it helps us to see cause and effect and to work more realistically. We're sort of exposing our values. We're saying, this is what I value. And on this basis, this is how I'm using these terms, for example. Now, today, how should we see the world? We're told by Lakoff and Johnson that how we see the world, our concepts, will influence our language and our behavior. Now, we're seeing these things, what's now Facebook calls itself metaverse, pluriverse, and how we see the world, like Nietzsche, the philosopher, he said God is dead. All we know is how we see the world. We can't pretend we know God. We've just got to work with our metaphors, our comparisons. Spinoza said, yes, God, that's nature. That's what we can see. We can see the goodness of life. Einstein, when he was asked, do you believe in God? He said, Spinoza's God. You know, so the natural laws of the world. Bohm said, it depends what you mean by God. Bohm was a great, great quantum theorist. You must look up his life. It's so, in fact, all these people's lives make the big difference between theory and practice and passion. If we read not just the theory, but the lives that these people have led, it will really fire us to better worlds. Because invoked or not, Jung says, the God, you, your passion, your experience, your imagination, your life, your interpretation is at the heart of the matter. So if you see a bird, you might see it as a bird. A robin, is it a vicious bird? It is, in fact, scientists will tell you, can be very vicious. And yet in the British psyche, it represents wonderful things of survival and positivity right through the winter. And each of these symbols, after all, a bird is the modern equivalent of the dinosaur. So survival is a strong feature there. But each of these symbols, you may recognize Ganesh, oil and water. All these symbols are capable of rivers, you know, meaning Jordan, Galilee, water, such miraculous gifts, and yet today not necessarily appreciated. Oil, for example, you know, in the old days, anointment, even now, the sick and the dying, anointment, even a little cross on someone's forehead makes a difference. But yet also the cause of much geopolitical bargaining, blackmail, and not necessarily a sanctifying symbol. So how we read symbols is crucial, is important. And this talk of we are made in the image of God, it means we've got to use our imaginations, but not to limit our interpretation of God to a personification, a personifixation, like I said earlier. Jung, for all his wonderful work, and Kant before him, saw how important it is, this imagination, how we see the goodness of life. And Cassirer, another great philosopher, said, there isn't a sharp distinction, no sharp dividing line between the myths of our lives as we move towards more scientific understanding. Science begins with myth, magic, inspiration, spontaneity, intuition. E.O. Wilson explained how our conscience develops from the sciences that we pick up in our lives. You know, we all know a little bit about what is good for our health, what we will buy, what foods we will buy for the children. So we know a little bit about biology and zoology, what to do for our pets, etc. How we put those sciences together, E.O. Wilson, the anthropologist, again, recently died at MIT. He was in his 90s, and it was very sad. I tried to see him. But anyway, he explains how our consciences develop from this collection of sciences that we pick up in life. He called them consilience. What is salient to your life, you will pick up, and that becomes part of your conscience. Today, the good news is that science, physics, and psychology are coming together, and phenomenology and neuroscience is pulling these sciences together. Irving Goffman, worked with suicide cases, gamblers, murderers. A wonderful man, died young, but he could see the cause of breakdown between what the values deep in us, the language and the expression of this, and between our private, personal, and public selves. And very humanely, he was able to see this trinity at work. When we talk of trinities, again, we don't want binaries, God and man. Notice there is a gap between the fingers in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel work, because this is a unity, an understanding, a partnership, which we are still working on. But feminists, anthropologists, historians are happy to note that in the left arm of God, the woman, the female principle, is already there. Maybe she needs more of a voice. Maybe the children need more of a voice as we bring our act together, this trinity, semantic and semiotic, which is ancient, as you see from what's in this Hermes hand. Today, for instance, Australia's Aboriginals working with the rainbow serpent, the many-colored, are repeating or reviving is the better word, ancient understanding that rests in Hindu chakras, in Buddhist kundalini, of a snake, a sapiente, a wisdom that's going from the base of our existence to the mind, or the crown of human excellence. And today we have studies like plasma studies, plasma, not just plasma as blood in the human body, but all the various forms of plasma on Earth. And these sort of studies, if they're taught well, if sciences and disciplines collaborate, science, medicine, psychology could come together. We use metaphors like glucose, coagulation, gluon cells, blood rain. If we work together, we can move much faster towards understanding and harmony. If we insert the me, individual selves, into the big picture, if we see media literacy as crucial, then all that we have, the laws we have, the United Nations articles and resolutions, the technology which shocks us when it turns against our own prime ministers, or the safe, smart cities we're promised, the spyware, and the poor individuals caught in the crossfire. We must choose our saints, our heroes, our leaders with care, but we've got to also play our part, controlling, supporting, feeding back. Feedback is an electronic metaphor, and we need to give plenty of that. We don't want to just be passive, and we don't want to be just active. We want to see, as in this strategy that Greimas offers us, how words are part of a complex network, how you could put all your concepts in a line, like at the top, a Likert scale. But when you do that, you'll see, wait a minute, what am I talking about? Am I talking about water? Am I talking about people? Am I talking about temperature, the weather? So words are, like we saw earlier, they could be prism, letting all the rainbow colors and the light shine through, or they could become prisons. If we stick to text and we don't see context and co-text, that's very dangerous. So what Greimas's tactic or strategy or tool of analysis is start with two contrary terms, then look for their contradictory terms, then look for their complementary terms, so what's involved in them. A simple way to say this is start with 2, move to 4, then see what's between these two, and keep going. Okay, so now between these two, what's the next concept? And then you begin to see this could be a star leading us somewhere good, or depending on the concept you're working with, it could be a bomb that blows up in your face. And you see that language has power for good and power for evil. And so working with contrary, contradictory, and complementary, or what's implied in these terms, this is best done with a group. It makes you wonder, where do we put all these other concepts? You know, Deobandi, some people fear this organization, and yet what does it mean? It means God, and Bandi, you're tied to God. Boko Haram, very bad, harm. Well, let's know more about what is harmful. Once we understand what struggle, what resurrection, insurrection, we will use these words with great care and with epistemic humility as we move towards truth, consciousness, joy. We will see that you are your church. On the side of your head is your temple. Ask your doctor, ask your psychiatrist, ask your linguist. These Templar lobes on the side, the lobby that's at work in this parliament, the talking shop of your head and heart. And of, sadly today, many of our parliaments are quite useless because they haven't maybe spent enough time understanding the linguistics at work in their work.
Maureen, we are already running out of time. Maybe you can come to your conclusion so that we have time.
Oh gosh, thank you. Okay, so I'm so sorry I've gone too long. This shows you language tricks. And Maurice Halley worked with linguistics, every sound, its position, its movement. Noam Chomsky's work, Maurice Halley's student and friend as well. His work went into computers. And then you see all the tricks, language as a sly fox, abjad languages where there were no alphabets, make it even harder to trace. And what I needed to say there was that today, computer science and linguistics struggle to capture metaphoric meaning. But there are so many names for goodness. If you find a particular, and the point is that we don't say exactly what we mean. When we say catch a bus, take the last train home, of course, that's not what we mean. When we talk of goodness, there are many terms to use in the mind, in the metalepsis, leaping across the imagination, the move from extremes to the middle ground, to the many different ways of expressing ourselves. If you find Jesus, Jesus, Jesus is just repetitive, dangerous for your mental health, use other terms, counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. These proverbs, slogans, jokes all make sense when we begin to understand the difference between the abstract and the blends, the cascades that take place when we use metaphor, how the mind is able to bridge these gaps. This is another tool showing how, if we analyze desire, the subject, what is desired, who's helping, who's holding back the progress, where this message and power is coming from, who will benefit. This actantial analysis is based on the processes and the practices and the organizations in the UK. This one is saying the universe is a mirror capable of much variety. Don't be narrow and stingy in your interpretation. The value of a religion is if it can prepare us for evolution, action, fitness for the future. That's what we need. Concentrate on creativity, spontaneity. Here is some excellent work being done even in Turkey, showing the spiritual at work, and journals like Perspectives on Terrorism help us understand the geopolitics of religious discourse. Finally, just one or two more slides. We're saying, get in touch with the spirit of the earth, with the geopolitics of what religion can offer us today as we move forward. The greatness of science is being able to explain myth as well. That's a quote from Levi Strauss. And what we're looking for, we will not cease from exploration. What we're looking for is for a marriage of true minds, not two minds, but true minds. Thank you, Ezra, Nazifa, Suleiman, Yuksal, and you, the audience.
We thank you for this profound presentation, Maureen. We have some questions. Let me read them for you. I can't see the name of the first participant, but I read her question or his. Professor Ellis, thank you for your inspiring speech. I'd like to ask something about creation myths. Do you think creation myths are a need for humans?
Yes, very much so. I think creation myths have survived because they have eternal truths. The point is to read them with their full power, with their metaphoric strength, and to see that they have survived because, and to choose with care the ones that have been able to cross culture, cross space, cross time, cross symbolism. Yes, certainly creation myths will empower creativity today, because if you are rooted and grounded, then you see your route and your way forward better. You know, you are stable, whether you think in terms of a tree or a river or whatever. But once your roots are firm, the deeper you go, the stronger you are for the winds of change. Does that help?
Okay, thank you.
I just want to move quickly to the next question.
Yes.
Anybody who wants more must look up the references and websites and then write to us, Ezra.
We have two more questions for now.
Good.
Eda Azap asks, first of all, thank you for your valuable research. How can we integrate all the theory into modern education system that consists of different branches?
Good. I think the first thing is to value theory. Much of my life, people have been told, this is theoretical. Not at all, because theory is what we pull together, like consilience, we pull the sciences together. Theory is what we pull together for our theology. All the ologies, biology, zoology, whatever, psychology, all these ologies have a logos, a word made flesh that is expressed in different ways. So whether in science or in art or in music, the logos, the word made flesh, that's why religions put so much importance to the word. But it must not just be a text, a rigid word. It must be a word made flesh. How is it being expressed today? And so how can the sciences come together? They can work together. Like we said, plasma studies. what is plasma? Most people will think, what, plastic you mean? Or plasma in my blood? But plasma is a very powerful concept. And it's also part of multimodality, the modes, the ways we use the word cross many disciplinary borders. If the disciplines, say, take a word even like light, such a simple one, every science, every field, photography, art, physics, they're all using light, but yet they don't talk to each other. They leave it to us to find enlightenment our own way. I think there should be much more pulling together of concepts, key concepts. When you come to PhD and journal level, they ask you what are your key concepts. But we should be working with these key concepts right from the start, right from kindergarten. We can help people see the whole, which will make them wholesome eventually, rather than just try to pull them into our church or pull them into our discipline. Let them fly, let them like stars, move. Project-based education is very good. If a student starts with butterflies, then wants to go to playing kites, flying kites, then wants to understand aerodynamics, then wants to understand, atmospheric. Let the child's imagination, with our educators' guidance, lead to the great things of life, rather than just holding them down to the lessons that we have planned for that day.
Thank you. And next question is from Kumsal Kanai. Thank you for the presentation. It was really inspiring for me. What's your advice to young scholars who are into meaning and metaphor? Where should we start discovering?
Students who are into metaphor are on the way to a wonderful thing. Where do they start? I think with letting them choose their pictures, letting them choose their songs, letting them choose their music, and then letting them look at the metaphors within that. So it must start with their passion, whatever that is, a game they play, a sport, whatever. Some song that to the teacher sounds like just noise, but to them, let them get into why, the why of life, not just the what and the how, but why does this appeal to you? And the more they begin searching and understanding the metaphoric power, why does this instrument in this music matter to you? Why does this particular singer's version of this song mean more than something else? Then they will identify their values. And then we will come to that slide where you say, this is the concept. It's equal to like life is a journey, or the body is a container, or karma, causality, is why we do things, is making me, pushing us forward, driving me mad, driving me to heaven or hell, whatever. So letting them look at what they love, letting them work out what values, letting them express them like equations, and then searching for people who can work with them, with those metaphors, seeing in other disciplines, how does this metaphor work? This word service. Okay, what does service mean? To one person, it's the church service, but what about the public service? What about the service, the social service? How can those organizations in our society work together? They say we have a queen, thank God, who wrote a book called The Servant Queen, Queen Elizabeth, who's now 96, and we're all so grateful but anxious for her. She wrote a book called The Servant Queen. What do we mean by servant and service? So that's the direction to go. Start with a passion and move to depth and value and collaboration, dialogue, dialectics, progress for all humanity.
Thank you, Maureen. By the way, first question was from Sena Özşirin. She says, thank you for the explanation. I think I should now close the session as there are other sessions starting soon. Thank you again, Maureen, on behalf of Üsküdar University Faculty of Communication. Thank you for joining us one more time. And
you.
also, I thank all the participants. We really appreciate all of you for attending today. Nazife Hocam, would you like to say
Thank you
anything?
very much, Maureen. It is very, very interesting presentation. Thank you for that.
Thank you for the opportunity, and please encourage your staff, students, and colleagues to keep in touch with me, because I'd like to take this forward.
Thank you.
I think Anatolia has a great history. As in Central Europe, there is great potential now, as Turkey wants to play its part with in the war as well as a negotiator. There is great potential there for a better world.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope we will meet in Istanbul in the future.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. I hope.
God willing.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Say a goodbye.
By the way, Dr. Maureen Ellis will be sending her full text manuscript to Interaction Journal, Etkileşim Dergisi. So our audience can read the full text from there. Okay.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye, and let's meet in the next sessions.
Thanks all.
Bye.